Prologue. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Prologue. On a hot summer night, the door and window of Plum Flower Pavilion, where two red words, happiness, were pasted, were tightly closed. Inside, the bright red wedding candles gave the whole room a warm red feeling. However, Xu Huan, who was wearing a red wedding dress and leaning against a sandalwood mirror, still had a pale face in this overwhelming redness. The sweat that was like rain cleared the heavy make-up on her face. While breathing heavily, her heart still felt oppressed that it almost exploded. However, it wasn't because she felt warm. It was panic. It was fear. Her hands and feet were cold like they held snow in the winter. There wasn't the slightest warmth on them. That person on the bed, that person. Although, the temperature from his palm were higher than hers, but his face was pale and he wasn't breathing. This was the person she married. The person who she wedded because of an arranged marriage, with the hope that the event of great joy would drive away his bad luck and hasten his recovery. How could he die on the day of marriage inside the wedding room? Xu Huan once again bravely stepped forward and reached out to see if Gu Shiran was breathing. She really couldn't feel even the slightest breath. Her white teeth bit her red lips very hard and left a mark, and it bled. However, she still didn't dare to cry, and she was afraid to shout. On the night of the marriage, the bridegroom died of illness. Could she still continue to live on? The repressed resentment rushed to the heart. When father and mother forced her to marry, they said it very beautifully: the illness wasn't so serious. It doesn't matter. After you marry, carefully serve him for a few days. He would naturally be grateful. Besides, even if the man's illness was dragged for a while, you are the official wife and had been married with 8 carriers carrying your palanquin honorably into Gu family's house. Would there be anyone in that Gu family who would dare to gossip and look down on you? They would just rush over to flatter you. Naturally, by then, you would have a use of them. Why would you bother to stay at this poor home and eat food that are hard to swallow? She was so stupid to believe these words used to coax people. She was so stupid to nod and agree to marry. She didn't wish for riches and glory. She only hoped to get a bit further and further away from that home that tormented her every day. As long as her ears could stay peaceful, she was willing to be a cow and horse inside Gu household. However, she had never thought that second young Master Gu was so seriously ill, so ill that he couldn't pass the wedding night and made her a widow. It seemed that she really was a star of disaster. Father and mother didn't scold wrongly at all. The resentment only stayed in the heart for a moment. It couldn't be helped. Ever since young, she had a weak personality like this. When she was in trouble, she could only cry. Perhaps that was why father got fed up with her and arranged a marriage for her. Xu Huan also wanted to cry now, but she didn't know why her eyes were dry. Not even a drop of tear came out. Her heart was also like this dry tear, every hope turned to dust. The first thing she caused after marriage was bring bad luck, cause the death of the man and widowed herself. The rumors and scoldings that were about to come were enough to annihilate all her hopes. Not to mention, the back-biting, disgraceful hard days and the inexhaustible suffering that was about to come. Living was really hard. It was better to die. Once that thought came into mind, it couldn't go away and lingered in her mind. A person like her had nothing which she cherished in this life anymore. Death was naturally also not begrudging. Instead, she saved many people from troubling themselves and also saved herself from many things. The spotless moon was clear and brilliant. A scream smashed this quiet night and swayed to far away. The servant who kept watch at night, who was snatching a moment of leisure and dozed off, was awakened by the shake from someone. The person rushed, quickly. Quickly, go invite a doctor. Quickly. The footsteps sounded all the way. The lanterns illuminated one after another. Rushing people were seen everywhere in Gu residence. But the most chaotic place was still Plum Flower Pavilion. There was an endless stream of people coming in and out. The red candles in the room burned for the whole night. The wax of the candles were everywhere on the candlesticks. TL note. This is the new book that I will be translating. I read this a few years ago and it stuck in my head, which is very difficult to do considering all the books I read. It is one of my most favorite books. I liked it very much because this book was simple and much more realistic. This is more my kind of book now. Perhaps, because I am getting old for those childish plot about infatuation and fighting against each other for no apparent reason. This book doesn't have scheming, well, almost no scheming, and supernatural powers or talents. There is also no palace politics. It is about two ordinary people trying to make the situation where they live in better and if they could, also find happiness. I did a review on it a few years ago. You can read it. As for the schedule, I plan/try to release 3 chapters a week, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. But all depends on how busy I am in real life. I hope you enjoy this book as much as I did. Chapter 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Detention in the morning at Plum Flower Pavilion. After tossing about in bed for a whole night and just having entered the land of dreams, Shu Huan was awakened by the push of someone. Confusedly, she opened her eyes and saw Maid Xiaoyun standing in front of the bed. Maid Xiaoyun said to her, "Second young mistress, forgive my offense." Before she could react, 2 servants came forward. With one at the right and one at the left, she was taken out of the room. She couldn't help but panic. "What are you doing?" Xiaoyun led the way in the front. She didn't turn. Old mistress said to change a more suitable place for second young mistress, lest to avoid you committing suicide every other day. The so-called suitable place was a small room inside Plum Flower Pavilion. There were only 4 walls. There wasn't even one piece of furniture inside the room. It was so empty that there wasn't even a bed. There was only a pile of dry straws on the ground. It seemed like a place where people used to sit on. How was this a place where people reside? It was obviously detention. Shu Huan was pushed to the pile of straws. Before she could get up, she heard the door being slammed. Not only was the door closed, but she could hear the sound of it being locked. It seemed that they were bent on to lock her up. Then, it wouldn't be of any use to scream and beat the door. Then, she would not waste energy. She sat while hugging her knees and put her chin on her knees. Suddenly, she felt her eyes stung and wanted to cry. She was already unhappy that she inexplicably time-traveled. And the original owner of this body had to commit suicide by hanging herself, making the moment she time-traveled to here, she had to stay in bed for 2 days and was forced to drink very bitter medicine. She didn't even have the time to think about what to do next, when she had fallen to the point where she was detained. It seemed that this mess left by the original owner was more troublesome than she thought. An abnormal experience, the physical pain and mental torture. Under such heavy pressure, Shu Huan wasn't able to take it anymore and fell asleep again. Even in her sleep, her heart was still tangled. So, she woke up again and then slept again. She didn't know how many times she slept and woke up. She also didn't know how much time had passed. When she truly woke up, she had completely figured it out and she had calmed down. Cherish life and stay safe. Anyway, a scorpion isn't afraid of being bitten. If one was already so unlucky, one would be unruffled. She stood up and sorted out the pile of straws, so that she could sit and sleep more comfortably. Suddenly, she heard the door being unlocked. She turned and saw Maid Huiyun came in while holding a red tray. Behind her was the sunset. It was nearly night. No wonder the room was so dark. When Huiyun squatted down and put the red tray on the ground, she saw the food that was sent in the morning and at noon. They weren't touched. She couldn't help but frown from worry. Second young mistress, no matter how much grievances and sadness you are feeling, you should eat. Eat. Of course, I will eat. Before, the room was too dark. Shu Huan didn't see those meals. Now, she was already very hungry. She reached out and grabbed a Chinese steamed twisted bread roll from the tray, put it in her mouth and began to chew. After Huiyun saw that she was willing to eat, she felt relieved. She comforted her, second young mistress, first succumbed to these grievances for a few days. Old Madam said that after second young master gets well, she will let you out. One mouthful of Chinese steamed twisted bread roll stuck in her throat and couldn't go down. Xu Huan took over the tea Huiyun quickly poured. After a few gulps, she showed a bitter smile. While she was in bed for 2 days, although she was so in pain as to not want to live anymore and didn't have the mind to pay attention to other things, but she heard some rumors. She vaguely knew that the original owner of this body was a girl from a poor family who married with the hope that the event of great joy would drive away his bad luck and hasten his recovery. In the end, she committed suicide by hanging on the wedding night and caused the already very ill second young master Gu to faint. 4 or 5 doctors were invited and took turns to take care of him. The event didn't bring great joy, but instead it brought bad luck. In all fairness, that Gu family detained her here was pardonable. She was gloomy but wasn't angry. She was thinking that after their anger was subdued, they would let her out. She didn't expect that Huiyun would give her a thunder from the clear sky. How was this comfort? This was worse than comfort. Xu Huan was afraid that she understood wrongly and asked, "I can go out after his illness got well?" Huiyun nodded a bit awkwardly. Old Madam said so. Really want to smash the table. Xu Huan lost appetite and put the Chinese steamed twisted bread roll on the tray. When do you feel his illness will get well? Huiyun hesitated and didn't answer. It was the same as she had guessed. He was already so ill that he needed a marriage so that the event of great joy would drive away his bad luck and hasten his recovery. Presumably, it was some chronic disease that couldn't be cured. It is a terminal illness. Wait till second young master Gu get well, then doesn't she have to wait until the end of time? Xu Huan said resentful, if his illness doesn't get well and if he... Huiyun panicked, second young mistress, don't say this. Second young master is a good person. Heaven will help those worthy. He will get well. Who was she deceiving? Xu Huan picked up a straw and kept tying it in knots. I didn't mean to curse him. I only wanted to understand the matter well. How long had he been ill? Huiyun also knew those words were a lie. She lowered her head. Ever since young, second young master's body hasn't been well. This illness had been lingering since he was 4 or 5 years old. Last year, he got seriously ill. Later, he got slightly better and was able to eat, but he wasn't able to get out of bed. Old Madam had been looking forward to seeing him get better, but she didn't expect that the spring of this year, his illness got worse again. After hearing this, Xu Huan couldn't sit still any longer. She stood up and said, I want to bother you to bring me to the old madam. In any case, she had to find a way of survival for herself. Whether it was possible or not, it was better than to sit and do nothing. She didn't expect that Huiyun hurriedly stopped her. Old Madam was in a bad mood these past 2 days. People wanted to hide from her. Why would second young mistress want to bump into her? It was better to stay here for a few days and then see what to do after. I can't stay any longer. Xu Huan raised her eyes, swept over the room and smiled bitterly. Are you afraid that I would commit suicide? You didn't even give me a bed. I don't mind sleeping on the ground, but letting me sit and lie for a whole long day, it really can let people go crazy from boredom. Your old madam should be a reasonable person. I only want to tell her that I won't commit suicide. She didn't have to guard against me like this. Instead of locking me up like this and waste your food, it's better to let me out and serve second young master to atone for my crimes by meritorious acts. The words were reasonable, but how could it be so simple? Locking her in here, aside from fearing that she would commit suicide, the old madam thinks that she was unlucky. She just married and almost caused the death of second young master. This was why old madam ordered her to be isolated. It was just, although Huiyun understood this in her heart, but because of her status, she couldn't say it openly. When she saw Shu Huan's persistence, she said, "Second young mistress, this slave can't decide on this. If you truly want to see old madam, you have to ask concubine Yun." Concubine Yun. Shu Huan was surprised. Huiyun didn't dare to look at her reaction. She said with lowered head, "Concubine Yun was taken in by second young master last year. It was also because he was seriously ill that old madam wanted him to take a wife to let the event of great joy drive away his bad luck and hasten his recovery. It was just, at that time eldest young master hadn't taken a wife yet. It was not good to take one before him, so she was made a concubine instead of a wife. When concubine Yun married over, she didn't sleep for 3 days and nights and served second young master without resting. Second young master got slightly better and she fainted from tiredness. Because of this old madam often praised her and said that this affection was rare. She also praised her in everything. Now, second young mistress, you." She paused and didn't continue, but Shu Huan understood. "Now, I am detained. She is in charge of everything in this courtyard." Huiyun nodded and didn't say anything. Shu Huan smiled bitterly. "Don't worry about not knowing the goods but worry about comparing them. Compared to the original owner, the actions of concubine Yun was like high the sky and her actions low like the ground. The moment the other party married, her whole heart was on the patient. The moment the original owner married, she rushed to commit suicide by hanging. No wonder even if she took up the identity of wife, she was still not accepted. It was just, she didn't know whether there was a hidden secret inside of these. Besides, everyone has their own aspirations. She also couldn't say who was wrong or right. She only knew that the mess she had to clean up because of the original owner was big. But no matter what, she first had to think of a way to get out. This was the most important thing at the moment. After thinking it through, Shu Huan insisted, "I bother you to please bring concubine Yun for me." Huiyun hesitated for a moment and then nodded. Chapter 1 Part 1 You are listening at Novel Full.audio. In the scorching hot summer, the doors of the Sheng Mei residence were adorned by the red double words of happiness as the windows were tightly closed. Inside the Sheng Mei residence the bright and shining candles reflected the room that was decorated in an ambiguous warm red, but dressed in Kyrgyzstan style. She tightly pulled her skirt while standing next to the sandalwood mirror which reflected a pale face in overwhelming red clothes. Sweat dripped like rain, upon her face was exquisite heavy makeup. Her chest felt as if it was about to burst and explode, feelings of fear and panic washed over her. Her hands and feet were ice cold. As if it was the twilight of the 12th lunar month, the season of snow, without the slightest heat. This sentence above was very hard to understand. So I typed it in my own way. The man on the bed. He was. The temperature of hand was higher than hers, but his paper white face had no signs of breathing. This is the man she married. She was happy to be married, but she never thought of her husband's death in the bridal chamber. Shu Huan bravely stepped forward, reaching out her hand to find any signs of breathing. Really cannot be true, really cannot be true. She did not feel even a little bit of breath. Shu Huan used her white teeth to bite her red lips very hard, until her lips drew blood. She was still shivering, too afraid to cry, too afraid to shout. On the bridal night, her groom died, how can she live it? Resentment bore in her heart when father and mother forced her to marry. It was nice to listen to. The disease is not heavy, it does not matter, when you have married, serve carefully for 2 days, sick men will naturally feel grateful. Moreover, even if the man's disease is dragged on for a while, you are married brightly with an 8-man sedan carrying you to the doors of the Gu family. That Gujia may have dared to gossip about you and look down on you. It will be too late for the flattery. When you can let us eat meat and delicacy, why keep on letting this poor family eat chives and vegetables? She was so stupid to be coaxed by those words. She was so stupid to have nodded to promise that she will marry. She does not envy the glorious wealth, not corrupt of jade clothing, just to leave her house tormented her day and night. As long as her ears will have silence, she was even willing to manage the cattle and horses of the Gu family. But she did not think that Gu Ergong's disease was this heavy. His disease was so heavy that he made her a widow in a night. This is really scourging disaster. Curse mother and father. She was full of resentment in her heart. But then in a moment her heart became void of emotions. There is no way she is this weak and easily bullied to the point of tears. Father and mother were so tired of her, so they married her off hurriedly, right? Xu Huan wanted to cry, but somehow, her eyes dry and astringent, not shedding even a drop of tear. Her heart was filled with despair. Married a man to kill him off. This was so hard to translate, not sure if correct. What will become of her when rumors like these spread? It was enough to destroy all the hope of her life. She would rather be stabbed by 1,000 spears than being forced to wear the stigma of killing. Being alive is too hard for her, it is better to die cleanly. The idea of suicide entered her mind, too entrenched lingering. She is a person. When health is dying, death will naturally come to one. But for her it was to have clean reputation. Something similar to this. Chapter 1 Part 2 You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. The bright moon, clear and empty, brilliant as if silk. A scream suddenly pierced through the silence of the night, echoing throughout. The night vigil servant was shaken awake hard, with a voice urging. Hurry. Go call a physician. Hurry. Footsteps sounded throughout. Lanterns lit up one after another, all around you can see silhouettes. But the most chaotic was the Shengmei residence, there was a constant stream of people coming in and out. The red candle of the room was still burning, candle wax dripping and condensing on the silver candle holder. A few days later, early in the Shengmei residence, Xu Huanxi had just fallen asleep when she was woken from her slumber. She was confused to see the maidservant Xiao Yun near her bed, saying, Mistress, we have offended. They did not wait for her to respond before two servants came forward and grabbed her left and right hands to take her outside. She was not shocked by the panic. What are you going to do? Xiao Yun led the way, not turning around to answer. Lao Tai Jun ordered for mistress to have a proper change of residence, for 3 or 2 days. Lao Tai, old lady the called proper change of residence is a little room in the Shengmei residence, only 4 walls nothing inside the room, there was not even beds only a pile of dry straw on the ground for people to sit down. She was going to be confined. Xu Huan was thrown onto the pile of straw, not even bothering to get up. Xu Huan listened to the sound of door closing, pang, accompanied by the sound of locking. Really too cold-hearted to think about her. She will not waste any efforts to cry, it was useless to cry. Xu Huan sat down with her chin on her knees, she suddenly felt her eyes moistening. She wanted to cry. Inexplicably, she wanted to die. But the original owner of the body also suicided by hanging herself. For the few days she had to lie on the bed, she had to drink bitter 7 or 8 bowls of traditional Chinese medicine, then it was reduced to the point of confinement. It seems that the pile of trouble that the original owner left was more troublesome than she thought. At first, under the heavy pressure of the painful experience of physical pain and mental torture, Xu Huan Tingbu Zhu fainted again. And the author casually decides to add another name, even though she fainted, her heart was still tangled. She did not know how much time has passed and how long it had been when she finally understood the situation and calmed down. She wanted to cherish life and go with a flow. Xu Huan got up to and started to sort out the straw since it was easier to sit in sorted out straw. She suddenly heard the sound of the door unlocking. She turned back to see the maidservant Huiyun opening the door with a red tray in her hand. Behind Huiyun, Xu Huan saw the vast twilight. It's going to be dark soon, no wonder there is no light in the room. Huiyun squatted down to keep the red tray on the floor, and when seeing the morning and noon food on the floor uneaten, Huiyun cannot help but frown and say, "Mistress, no matter how wronged you feel, you must eat." "Yes. Of course, I will eat." It was too dark in the room for Shu Huan to see those meals. In fact, she was very hungry. Shu Huan took a piece of roll from the tray and chewed it. Seeing that she was willing to eat, Huiyun was much warmer and said, "Mistress, you will only stay here for a few days," Lao Taijun said. "When the Lord gets better she will let out." The piece of roll in her throat suddenly choked her. Shu Huan made Huiyun pour her tea and hurriedly drank it. Shu Huan revealed a bitter smile. Chapter 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Concubine Yun. As the saying goes, take a wife, take someone virtuous. Take a concubine, take someone beautiful. When Shu Huan saw concubine Yun, she really felt that her eyes became brighter. She had a beautiful, lucid and elegant face. Her temperament was as gentle as water. On her hair was only a pearl hairpin and she was dressed in a smoky light green skirt lined with a white cloak. It made her look all the more beautiful, like white lotus leaves that emerged from the water without a trace of dust. And, like a clear spring in the mountains, she exuded a quiet and elegant charm. Her appearance was about 70% beautiful. Plus, with her gentle temperament, why would she need to be a concubine? She was more than qualified to become someone's wife. Il's second young master was really lucky. While Shu Huan was envious in her heart, she couldn't help but also let out a sigh of relief. Before she time-traveled, her appearance didn't lose to concubine Yun. But she couldn't compare to this classical and gentle temperament. She hadn't looked in the mirror yet and didn't know how she looked now, but she knew her own virtue. Even if it wasn't like charcoal, even if it wasn't like the gentle look that men liked. With such a jade-looking beauty next to her, even if she got in front of that second young master and used all kind of beauty tricks, he wouldn't take a fancy on her. That was great. Although it was important to continue living, she wasn't willing to cross her bottom line and wasn't willing to roll in the sheets with a strange man. While she was looking at concubine Yun, the other party was obviously also looking at her. It was just that the other party didn't do it as intensely as she did. She, only glanced at her, twice and then paid her respect. Yen greet second young mistress, be nov calm. The manner was graceful, elegant and natural. It happened that Shu Huan was ignorant of these rules and etiquettes. She could be considered simply as a savage and wild person. She smiled bitterly, no need to be so polite. I asked you to come here only to ask for a favor from you. Can you let me see old madam? Concubine Yun lowered her head slightly. Big sister talking like this is regarding me as an outsider. In the future, if you need something, you can just directly tell people to order Yen. It's just, to see old madam, I have to send people to ask first. I am afraid that over there, they already started having their dinner and so we have to wait for a moment. While she was talking, she whispered to Huiyun to go check on the situation. Huiyun took the command and went. Only Shu Huan and concubine Yun were left here. Concubine Yun maintained the correct attitude. She stood there respectfully, eyes looking at the nose pointing at the mouth and the mouth pointing at the chest. It was a bit awkward. After all, they were complete strangers. The attitude of the other party was also of customs which gave it an alienation feel. Shu Huan was also not someone who would get close to another upon meeting. She, didn't know what to talk about with her. To overcome boredom, she looked at the scenery outside. At this time, the sky had already darkened, but there were 2 lanterns hanging on the door in the courtyard. Because of this, she was able to see a small independent courtyard. At the 3 sides, houses surrounded it and made it look like a large yard. There were several plum trees planted and dotted with some stone plantains. Under the eaves, there were a few birds in a cage. Although the vat of lotus flowers was not particularly elegant, it was beautiful and secluded. Speaking of which, it had been 3 days since she time-traveled to here. It was just that she hasn't gone outside. When she woke up early in the morning, she was taken out by people and didn't have time to look around. Now, looking at this courtyard full of ancient concept, she also liked it. She could only sigh secretly. If she hadn't time-traveled, she could come live at such a place to steal half a day of rest. While she was talking, she saw a little maid ran out from the main house. She ran to concubine Yun and said, "Second young master refused to take the medicine and smashed the bowl. Big sister Qiaoyun is asking concubine Yun to come over and persuade second young master." Concubine Yun hesitated and looked at Shu Huan. With her here, Shu Huan felt very awkward. She was eager for her to leave. She quickly said, "Go, no need to worry about me." After this, concubine Yun pleaded her excuse and rushed over to the main house with that little maid. No one would come guard her for the time being. Shu Huan looked around and wondered whether she should use this opportunity to escape. If she was in the modern era, she wouldn't have hesitated. She would definitely escape. It happened that she was in the ancient era now. She didn't know whether the outside world was peaceful or filled with trouble. Moreover, she didn't have a penny on her. Even if she sneaked out, it would be like touching in the dark. Not to mention that she wouldn't be able to find a job in this kind of world where the man was supreme. She could be fooled by a kidnapper and be sold to a worse place. By then, no one would respond to her cries or screams. The more she thought about it, the deeper she frowned. Shu Huan quickly dispelled the idea of escaping. She sat again on the pile of straws and picked up the already cold Chinese steamed bread roll and continued to chew on it. Have to be strong. Have to eat. Have to live on. She continued to hypnotize herself. After waiting for like an hour, she saw Huiyun return. She saw her shook her head first and then apologize, "Old madam doesn't want to see you. She didn't even let me speak more than necessary and sent me back." Shu Huan was silent. She was already prepared for this answer and wasn't that disappointed. Huiyun saw that she was silent and wanted to comfort her, but she didn't know how to. In the end, she retreated silently. She was just about to lock the door when she heard the inner door being slammed. She opened the door. "What else is there, second young mistress?" Even if the environment was very bad, she had to work hard to improve it. She couldn't let herself be treated unfairly and suffer grievances. Shu Huan quickly said, "When the door is closed, the room is very dark. I want candles." Huiyun hesitated. "What? Are you still afraid that I will commit suicide?" "Don't worry, no matter how stupid I am, I won't do such a thing." "So painful." "Second young mistress, wait for a moment." "Wait, I also want mosquito-repellent incense." Mosquito-repellent incense. Those who repel insects and mosquitoes. Huiyun nodded, "That is realgar incense." She turned and wanted to leave. "What should I do if I want to relieve myself at night?" Huiyun also frowned because of her many demands. After she went to get the bucket, she stood there waiting for her to continue asking for this and that. Who would have thought that Shu Huan finished asking for her things? Seeing that she, didn't leave, she, was surprised and stared at her, without saying a word. Huiyun laughed, "Does second young mistress want more things?" "No. It was just," she thought a bit and then said, feeling a bit embarrassed, "if it's not too troublesome, get a book for me, alright. Don't bring those poetic ones. Bring me the recordings of dynasties or essays." She had slept enough during the day. Now, the night was long. She didn't know how she could kill time. Reading was the best choice and she could also learn more about this world. After Huiyun heard these, she was surprised, second young mistress knows how to read. Oops. She forgot that for women in the ancient era, having no talent was a virtue. Moreover, the original owner of this body seemed to be born in a poor family. If she was literate, then it would be demonic strange. It was just, the words already came out of her mouth. It was difficult to take them back. It was also very inconvenient to pretend to be illiterate in the future. Xu Huan could only brace herself and lie. When I was young, I lived near an old teacher. Perhaps it was fate, but he taught me how to read. However, it had been so long, I also had almost forgotten everything. I just want to take a book and see how much I still remember. Speaking these words slowly, her forehead was full of sweat. However, she felt somewhat proud in her heart. This lie was so good. Who would inquire about when you were young? Even when the book was brought and she couldn't understand the words, she could say that she had forgotten them. Hui Yun didn't linger on this kind of thing. It was just that she had always been cautious. At this moment, she said with difficulty, "This slave doesn't know how to read and don't know which book second young mistress wants. Why don't I go ask second young master and let him pick one for you?" Xu Huan began to wipe her sweats. "No need, no need. He is still ill. Don't bother him. Bring whatever you find." Hui Yun went away. Chapter 3. You are listening at novelfull.audio. TL note. Lunar New Year bonus chapter. Happy Chinese New Year. Chapter 3. Encountering joy is the norm of happiness. In less than a moment, everything that Xu Huan wanted was brought over. Besides, Huiyun was cautious and feared that it was not to her liking, so she took 4 or 5 books for her. It was enough for her to choose from and read. She also brought a thin blanket for her to use at night. Afterwards, she locked the door and left. At this moment, the realgar incense was lit at the corner. The straws were piled up comfortably and the thin blanket was placed on top of it. There were 4 or 5 books on hand. Xu Huan lit a candle and laid down, heaving a deep sigh. Everything was fine except for one thing, there was no candle holder. It seemed that Huiyun was still afraid that she would commit suicide and didn't dare to give her sharp objects. She could only lie on one side and put the book close to the candle so that there was enough light to read. The words in the book were written in traditional Chinese. The characters were small and the handwriting was neat and tidy. There were many strokes in traditional Chinese, so it was not easy to write the characters, but to understand them wasn't difficult. Aside from some rarely used words, she could guess the other words. Only, she wasn't accustomed to reading from the right to the left and from top to bottom. Besides, the sentences didn't have any punctuation, so after reading 2 or 3 pages, she already felt dizzy. However, the book in her hand was a chronological history on Chinese dynasties. It was very useful in understanding this world. She patiently continued to look at it by reading the main points. She discovered that she'd never heard the names of the countries and years recorded in the book. It seemed that she traveled to another unknown time and space. Anyway, she didn't study history well, when she was in the modern era. She only knew about some important things. What year or anything else was already blurred in her memory. It was not enough to rely solely on those historical events to avoid the evil. Even if she traveled to the familiar Tang, Song, Yuan, Ming or Qing dynasties, she would still have been baffled. Therefore, she wasn't disappointed. She could only start by memorizing the current country and year. While she turned the page, a piece of paper suddenly fell from it. Even if she was sharp-sighted and quick to want to grab it, the paper was already burned by the candle's flame. After she used the book to extinguish the fire, some words on it was already black and damaged. She couldn't help but look at it. There was written, "Because he lost his mother young and caught a grave disease, I sensed that he would not stay in this world for long, that I and the family, there's a big brother and a few younger brothers." Originally, there was no intention to take a wife, send the betrothal gift to Shu family's daughter named that I still remembered the sentence left by the monk that I once visited. Encountering joy is the norm of happiness. Could this marriage be destined by the heavens that I feel frightened and happy in my heart? There was also no punctuation on the paper. The sentences were cut by how she interpreted it. She didn't know whether she was right or not. Only, when she saw the 3 words, Shu family's daughter, her eyelids jumped, and when she saw, encountering joy is the norm of happiness, and the later sentences, she couldn't help but curse, destined by heaven, my ass. After cursing, she felt that she was a bit rude. She couldn't help but cover her mouth. The sentences on the paper wasn't complete, but she got the general meaning. She clung on to the 2 words, Shu Huan. Could it be that the original owner of this body had the same surname and name as her? As for the marriage destined by the heavens, she took it as nonsense. If it was really like that, the original owner wouldn't have committed suicide by hanging on the wedding night. That second young master encountered joy, Huan, wouldn't he run around the yard in happiness? How would he have fainted? Anyway, no matter who she wanted to steal, she wouldn't steal someone who already took a concubine and was ill. Shu Huan burned the paper on the flame in disdain and watched it turn into ashes. After this, her mood was a bit down. She didn't have the patience to go read the history book anymore. She just picked a random book. She didn't expect that it was a book about strange stories. She only read a few sentences when her head was already full of mysteries. Deserted temple, scholar, fox lady, phantom, etc. All was in the plot. At this moment it was a quiet night. There was a cool breeze blowing in from under the door, making it so that the candlelight didn't know whether to be lit or be extinguished. It made her scared. So, she quickly threw the book into a corner. She habitually reached out to touch the jade around her neck. The jade was something her mother got from a temple when she, was young. It was said that it could drive away evil and keep her safe. Whether she believed in it or not, it had been something she wore ever since she was young and could let her feel at ease. It was just that she had forgotten that she had time-traveled. She touched and didn't feel anything. Her face turned a bit pale when she thought about the weird things she personally experienced. It happened that at this time, footsteps could be heard outside, scaring her so much that she wrapped the entire thin blanket around her body and shrunk herself into a ball. She meditated, he who never did anything wrong, does not fear the knock in the night. While she meditated, the footsteps stopped. Someone knocked on the door. Shu Huan closed her eyes and didn't respond no matter what. After having knocked twice and no one responded, the person outside whispered, "I don't know what concubine Yun is thinking, and let us come take a look in the middle of the night." At this time, the person must have already slept. Don't blame her. She's just being cautious. She is afraid that if something happened, she wouldn't be able to explain. There is light between the cracks. Go take a look whether second young mistress is asleep. After a silence, there was chatter again. She's asleep. She didn't extinguish the candle. Big sister Xiangqian, I'm so sleepy. Do we really have to stay watch here? Why don't we take turns? You watch the first half of the night and I the second half. No, it's so dark outside here. I'm afraid to stay here alone. Big sister, accompany me for a while, all right. Hearing that it was only 2 maids who came to check, Shu Huan felt relieved. She wished that they wouldn't go away. Like that, she would know that someone was nearby, and she wouldn't let her imagination run wild. The 2 maids didn't know that she was awake. They were bored outside and couldn't help but talk to each other in low voices. Big sister Xiangqian, you also still haven't got your payment of this month. It was said that the shops needed the money. After 2 days, we will be paid. It was just, aside from here and the third miss, the other places have already got it. Second young master was already not favored at home. Now, he took such a mistress, probably, he would be more isolated. Even we will suffer. We can't do anything about it. The disease of second young master is well known in the city. Which one of those families who are well matched would want to marry their daughters over in hope that the event of great joy would drive away bad luck and hasten his recovery? They could only look at poor and humble families. Didn't concubine Yun also come from a humble family? She was even bought by old master and madam and was much better than her, sh. She had learned etiquettes and rules before marrying to here, how could they be compared? Don't talk about this anymore lest to let her hear it inside. What about it if she heard us? Now, you are working for concubine Yun and I am second young master's people. Could she still punish us? The two maids still lowered their voices. After talking a bit more, they were silent. After listening, Shu Huan also identified them. The one who was extremely dissatisfied about her was Qiaoyun, who brought others in the morning to lock her up. No need to blame her for complaining. The original owner committed suicide by hanging once. It made these people become scared birds and they weren't able to sleep at night. They also had to guard outside her door at night. It would be strange if they didn't have any complaints. She smiled faintly and didn't care. Her heart was more settled knowing that there were people outside. She closed her eyes and listened to the low cries of the worms in the yard and subconsciously fell asleep. Chapter 4. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Fire inside the dream, it was a vast boundless ocean. She was exhausted from struggling. Suddenly, a wave came at her, it somehow turned into a rising flame. She then felt a burning pain through her skin. Shu Huan opened her eyes and discovered that her struggle in the dream made her extend her hand and knock down the half-burning candle. The flame burned her skin and the straws. When the straws met the fire, they were immediately ignited. She quickly got up and wanted to step on the fire to extinguish it, but the fire had already spread. The four sides of the room were made from wood. If the fire couldn't be controlled on time, it may spread to the nearby wings. There's fire. Open the door, quickly open the door. Shu Huan got anxious. She slammed twice on the door. She didn't wait till the door was opened and took the thin blanket to slam the flames. Sparks flew everywhere, some even flew into her hair. At this time, Xiangqian had already gone back to her room to sleep. The one who was guarding outside was Qiaoyun, who was dozing off. She was awakened by the noise. Only when she was about to open the door and searched her body did she remember that the key was not with her. She then ran to Xiangqian in panic. This incident had alarmed many people. Even concubine Yun was awakened. She quickly inquired about what had happened, wore some clothes and came over with Xiangqian and a few maids. As soon as the door was opened, they couldn't see what the situation was like inside when a thick smoke came out, making everyone teary-eyed as they coughed. Then, Shu Huan came out surrounded by flames and smoke. She sat down on the ground and coughed, Bring water. There's still a small fire that hadn't been extinguished. She already did her best. She managed to keep the fire from spreading. However, she was almost killed by the smoke. Although she said that a small fire wasn't extinguished, now that the door was opened the wind poured in, so the flames resurged. The maids panicked, brought water, lit the lights, searched for buckets and poured water on the fire. After busying for a long time, the fire was extinguished. When they looked inside the room, half of the walls were already burnt black. There was water everywhere. Mixed with the ashes of the straws, the place was drenched. Shu Huan's appearance wasn't much better than the room's. Her face was stained with gray. She was full of sweat and her hair was scattered, a small part of it burned by the fire. The clothes on her body was also crumpled. Because she was sleeping and was caught by surprise, she didn't have time to wear shoes. The white socks on her feet also turned black. It happened that concubine Yun was standing next to her now. Her whole body was refreshing, and her hair was like a waterfall without any strand out of place. In contrast, her sorry figure was particularly apparent. The maids looked at each other in dismay. Concubine Yun frowned slightly. Big sister, this. She caused trouble again. But why mention it again? She couldn't blame committing suicide by hanging on her. Shu Huan sighed in her heart and stood up from the ground. I'm sorry. I fell asleep while the candle was still burning. I didn't expect it to cause a fire. Huiyun quickly rushed over and knelt. This is this slave's fault. It was this slave who brought the candles for second young mistress. Get up. Concubine Yun shook her head. You reported about the matter of the candles to me. I was negligent. She hadn't finished speaking yet, when she suddenly saw a white figure at the main wing on the other side. She quickly said, Second young master, why did you come out? Second young master. Her sickly husband. Shu Huan looked curiously over. Under the shadow of the lights, her eyes met a pair of eyes with an inquiring look. The corners of the eyes were slightly tilted. A mistiness flashed in the eyes. When she looked again, that pair of eyes was as bright as the clear spring. Shu Huan was surprised. She seemed to have seen such a pair of eyes somewhere before. Her gaze lowered and she saw the lips that slightly arched up. The smile seemed faintly discernible. She looked at Gu Shiran again from the top. She saw that the outline of his face was very handsome. It was just, he only had 30% of youthfulness and 70% of illness. He looked thin and haggard. This made the eyes seem brighter as if they could look right into one's heart. They were obviously strangers who had never met before, but there was a faint familiarity that lingered in her heart. They only looked at each other for a moment and concubine Yun was already anxious to support Gu Shiran back inside. She said, It's very windy outside. Second young master, be careful to not catch a cold. Quickly go back inside the wing. You can't get sick anymore. Gu Shiran shook his head. He gestured at Shu Huan, come here. Me. Shu Huan was puzzled, but still moved over. What command does second young master have? Gu Shiran was not in a hurry to talk. He looked at her from top to bottom. When he saw how dirty she was, he couldn't help but frown. He said to the maids in the yard, go get some water. Qiaoyun boldly replied, Second young master, the kitchen had long closed so late at night. Gu Shiran's gaze slowly swept over her. Qiaoyun's heart skipped a beat and quickly said, I will go take a look. Perhaps, there is still hot water from this morning there. Huiyun also quickly said, if it isn't enough, there is still a pot of water in the tea room which was prepared in case second young master wanted to drink tea. Gu Shiran nodded, bring the water to my wing. While talking, he lowered his eyes and looked at Shu Huan, support me to go in the room. As soon as this was said, concubine Yun awkwardly loosened the hand that was supporting him and stood there silently. Shu Huan was more puzzled. She didn't know why he was being like this. She only felt that being sandwiched between him and concubine Yun, she truly had the feeling of being the other woman. She felt a bit annoyed. She originally wanted to decline, but when she saw her dirty hands and saw the white clothes on his body, she changed her mind. A smirk appeared at the corner of her lips. She reached out, grabbed his arm and assisted him on getting inside. Little guy, who let you pretend to be arrogant? I would ruin your clothes. After she assisted Gu Shiran back indoors and let him sit down on a chair in the room, she let go of his hand. Sure enough, there were two black hand prints on the white sleeves of his clothes. Shu Huan lowered her eyes and stifled a smile. Gu Shiran also saw the stains on his sleeves and stayed silent. Only a tera long while did he raise his head and looked at concubine Yun who also followed them inside, bring some replacement clothes. Concubine Yun hesitated for a moment. Then, she nodded and went away. After a short while, she brought two pair of clothes. Of course, one was for Gu Shiran to change into. The other one was prepared for Shu Huan. Following her were two maids carrying a barrel. At the back was Huiyun, who brought some fragrant ointment, fragrant powder and perfumed oil. After seeing these and also recalling that Gu Shiran had asked for water, Shu Huan immediately felt embarrassed. She had to ignore the awkward atmosphere, summoned her courage and said, I will go to my room and wash there. No need to move these things here. Concubine Yun didn't answer her. She, waited for Gu Shiran to give her some hints. Gu Shiran took the tea bowl, lowered his eyes and said, take them to the inner room. Concubine Yun felt sour in her heart. She busied herself with concealing it. She went with those maids to the inner room to prepare. Before time-traveling, Xu Huan was a sophomore student. Even if she was open-minded, she wasn't open-minded to the degree where she would have one-night stands with strangers. Regardless of what had happened to the original owner and what had caused that she wanted to commit suicide by hanging on the wedding night, to Xu Huan, the man in front of her was a stranger. From their meeting to now, it hadn't been more than 10 minutes. In such a short time, she had to bathe and change clothes in this person's room. She couldn't do it. After getting anxious, she couldn't care about anything else and said, men and women shouldn't have direct contact. You doing this is not so well, right? Gu Shiran slightly pursed his lips up and put the tea bowl down. You are already married to me, and you still care about this. Dispirited. It was a fact that she married him and was his legal wife. Xu Huan couldn't argue and said indirectly, second young master, your illness hasn't healed yet, I am also thinking about your body. This was said extremely awkwardly. Even her face got red. Gu Shiran glanced at her once. A smile showed on his lips, there's no harm. This master isn't interested in this bean sprouts-like body of yours. Chapter 5 You are listening at novelfull.audio. The bath bean sprouts. These two words made Xu Huan angry. As a woman, she would be unhappy when being scorned by others whether or not she cared about her appearance and body. Moreover, even if she didn't know how she looked after she time-traveled, she could still estimate her body shape. It was slender and thin as if she was about 14 or 15 years old. If she changed into men's clothes, she could pass as a servant. Her good figure from the past was gone. That was enough to make her feel gloomy. How could she still take what the others had to say? The moment she got angry, her worries were left behind completely. She didn't say more, turned and went into the inner room. Wasn't it just taking a bath in his room? Who was afraid of who? With his sickly appearance that could be blown away by the wind, she would be able to smash him down with any bricks if he was misbehaving. However, it would be very difficult to find a brick here. After she entered the inner room, her gaze swept around the room first. There was a copper incense burner resting on the sandalwood table in front of the window. She immediately relaxed upon seeing this and nonchalantly sent the others away, leaving only Huiyun behind to help her wash her hair. It wasn't that she was striking a pose. It was just that people in this era had a bad habit of not cutting their hair. She alone wouldn't be able to wash her super-long hair cleanly. Not to mention, she didn't know anything about the bathing supplies from here. She had to ask Huiyun. Huiyun was someone with a good temper. She didn't have any complaints even if she didn't get to sleep in the middle of the night. She also patiently took care of her hair and put them in a basin of water. Then, she took a crystal-clear bottle and dripped a few light yellow drops into the basin. A light jasmine fragrance came out because of the heat. Xu Huan was curious and asked with interest, "What is this?" Huiyun knew that she came from a poor family. It wasn't strange that she didn't recognize this thing. So, she handed the crystal bottle to Xu Huan and grinned, "This is jasmine nectar." Jasmine nectar. Xu Huan placed the crystal bottle under her nose and sniffed slightly. A strong smell ran into her nose and made her almost sneeze out. She quickly put the bottle a bit farther away. She thought that this thing was similar to the fragrant oil used by people in the modern world. Presumably, it could also be used as aroma. While she was in deep thoughts, Huiyun explained without being asked, "The family is doing business in the fragrance industry. Aside from incenses and fragrant ornaments, they also sell all kind of nectars. Naturally, this jasmine nectar is a top-quality good as it was rare for the fragrance to be so light and elegant. It was the best to use in the summer. However, if second mistress doesn't like this smell, there are also nectars made of roses and osmanthus. Should I go get them? No need, this one is already very great. Was she looking for trouble for herself by washing herself so fragrantly in the middle of the night and in Gu Shiran's room? Xu Huan shook her head wisely. She only privately remembered her words. After washing, Huiyun wiped her hair dry and tied it in a simple knot. Xu Huan quickly urged her to go sleep. She closed the window slightly and inserted the door latch. Only after she moved the heavy copper incense burner from the red sandalwood table and held onto it, was she relieved to take off her clothes. Had to say that it was very troublesome to take a bath in ancient times. It wasn't as convenient and hygienic as taking a shower. But it was really comfortable to sit in the wooden tub and let the body be submerged in the slightly hot water. Xu Huan's tight state of mind finally relaxed and she felt a bit tired. Of course, she couldn't sleep here. She picked up her spirits and began to take a bath while she recalled the confusion she felt when Gu Shiran appeared. She searched through her memory but still couldn't find the origin of that feeling of familiarity. She could only see it as being influenced by that paper which stated destined marriage by the heavens. That was why she subconsciously felt familiar with this person. He was not Brother Bao and she was not Sister Lin. What familiarity! She was careless and was rude again. Xu Huan sighed and frowned. Whether she was too narcissistic or having thoughts that she and Gu Shiran were destined to be together by the heavens, at this moment, he forced her to bathe in his room. Then, next. She couldn't help herself from thinking more of it and become nervous. However, in the end, she didn't have a good plan and could only remember 4 words. Rather die than submit. While she was calculating inside, Gu Shiran who was waiting outside got a bit impatient. It was just taking a bath, did she have to dilly-dally for so long? Concubine Yun stayed with him. Seeing that he was slightly tired, she couldn't help but ask with some hope, "Second young master, your body couldn't stay up all night. Why don't you rest in the west wing tonight?" Xu Huan lived in the east wing 2 days ago. The west wing had always been concubine Yun's residence. Gu Shiran shook his head, "No need. You should go rest." Concubine Yun wanted to continue speaking but then hesitated. In the end, she lowered her head and persisted on staying here, she wasn't willing to leave. Xu Huan was dilly-dallying and being so slow because she wanted to delay time. She soaked so long that the skin on her fingers became wrinkled. The water had also cooled. Even her hair was half dry, but she couldn't not go put on clothes. She pulled the latch. She first went to the door panel to listen to the movements from outside. It seemed that there was no sound and she immediately sighed from relief. She thought that Gu Shiran and concubine Yun couldn't wait anymore and found another room to sleep in. She opened the door and wanted to sneak back to the east wing. She didn't expect that the moment she opened the door, she saw the 2 people still sitting in the living room. The smile on Xu Huan's face immediately froze. She said embarrassed, "You are still here." Gu Shiran glanced tiredly at her and said weakly without strength, "This is my bedroom. Where can I still be if it was not here?" Xu Huan was also dissatisfied. It wasn't that she was willing to occupy his bedroom and take a bath. Could he blame her? However, she still showed a smile on her face and moved to the door of the living room while saying, "I'm sorry to let you wait for so long. It's not early anymore. You 2 should go rest. I will return to my room." After she spoke, she wanted to sneak away quickly. She didn't expect that in her rush she'd slammed onto the door. It hurt her so much that she covered her forehead and her tears almost fell. When she looked at the door, it was already closed, but there was a dense bamboo curtain covering it. She didn't see the door and thought that it was open. Gu Shiran's face that was full of tiredness finally showed a smile that rejoiced on another people's misfortune. Concubine Yun quickly rushed to see her wound. It's my fault. I was afraid that it was very cold outside and let people close the door. Is second young mistress hurt? Should I call some people to get some medicinal wine to wipe on it? No need, no need. I'm not injured. After a while, it won't hurt anymore. Xu Huan didn't give up on wanting to slip out and reached to open the door. At this time, Gu Shiran stood up while using the chair as support. Concubine Yun, go rest. We are also going to rest. We. Thunder from the clear sky, ah. Who wants to rest with him? Xu Huan turned around and wanted to make it clear to Gu Shiran that she would not warm the bed for others. Who would have thought that the moment she opened her mouth, Gu Shiran cast at her a glance, making her slightly surprised. She guessed that perhaps this person had something to say to her that he couldn't talk about in front of people and wanted her to stay to speak in private with her. She pressed down the temptation to shed all pretense of cordiality with him and stood there silently. Concubine Yun was also surprised. She forced the sorrow from her heart and said sadly, then Yen would retire first. Gu Shiran nodded, but didn't speak. She turned and went out. Xu Huan looked at him and then looked at Concubine Yun's back that disappeared into the night. She frowned slightly. Chapter 6 You are listening at Novel Full.audio. The bean-like plum flower. Not long after Concubine Yun left, Xiangqian brought 2 lower-level maids to clean up the things for the bath. However, after cleaning, Xiangqian didn't have the interest to leave and stood at a side. Gu Shiran swept a glance over her. You aren't going to sleep. Xiangqian replied, Concubine Yun let this slave sleep on the couch outside of the curtain to avoid second young master and mistress couldn't call people when you want to drink water or tea. No need. You can retreat and remember to close the door. While Gu Shiran was speaking, he looked at Xu Huan. Help me get inside. He became addicted to ordering people around. Xu Huan felt bitter, but she still remembered that glance from him just now. She was curious and could only help him get inside and lie down on the bed. However, after seeing that his body was so weak that if no body helped him, he wasn't able to even walk stable, she was a lot more relaxed and didn't have to worry that he had other motives. After a moment, the sound of the door could be heard outside. Presumably, Xiangqian went out. Aside from the 2 of them, there was no others in this room. Xu Huan hurriedly asked, What do you want to say to me? Gu Shiran was so tired at this moment and was even too lazy to open his eyes. He said, What should I have to say to you? Hey! Xu Huan felt the feeling of being deceived. Then, what did you mean by that glance of just now? Gu Shiran thought it was funny and opened his eyes. It didn't mean anything. I just wanted you to stay. What the hell? Xu Huan said no more, turned and left. Gu Shiran didn't stop her and only said, I already let people lock the door of the east wing. If you go back now, you have to bother people to get up and open the lock for you. You already caused so much trouble this night. Is it still not enough? You should leave some hours for people to sleep. She also felt apologetic to go bother people. However, locking to not let her go back, what does this person want to do? Xu Huan turned back and glared at him, you went overboard. Gu Shiran smiled lazily and retorted, was it? Xu Huan was speechless. Indeed, because she time-traveled and wasn't the original owner, she felt that it was a matter of course that she didn't share the same bed with a stranger. However, it also seemed a matter of course that Gu Shiran asked to share the bed with the wife who he was officially married to. Even to outsiders, the one who was not reasonable was her. She could only use the indirect tactic again, that, seeing the new person laugh, how would one know the bitterness of the old person? Presumably Yen would be very sad seeing you like this. Gu Shiran looked at her with interest. After a moment, he said, it's none of your business. What do you know? Take care of yourself first. Was he saying that she was too nosy? Xu Huan opened her mouth and wanted to retort. After she thought about it, she decided to forget it. The two of them grew up in different environments. Naturally their beliefs were also different. Moreover, even if she continued to talk about it, it would be a waste of saliva. She lowered her eyes and stood there. She used silence to express her inner resistance. Gu Shiran looked at her. Under the candlelight, that meager face had soft and hazy glow. Her eyes were lowered. Her lips showed a girl in her teenage years. Her wet hair was slightly scattered on the shoulders. She seemed as delicate as the tip of a branch and a bean-like plum flower. Childlike. He smiled slightly and closed his eyes tiredly. He slowly said, "If you want to stand, then continue to stand. I will sleep first. When you come to the bed, remember to blow the candles and don't cause another fire." He was probably very tired. When he finished speaking, he began to lose his consciousness and was already in the state of being half asleep. When Xu Huan saw that his breathing was steady and he didn't seem to have faked it, she felt a bit embarrassed. Could it be that her thoughts were really too impure, and she was too narcissistic? However, if it was as simple as just sleeping, it wouldn't matter where she sleeps. Why did he had to twist and turn so many times to let her sleep here? She didn't know who said that a woman's heart was deep as the sea. In fact, men were the same, making people unable to guess and grasp them. She looked around and felt that sleeping on a chair was too uncomfortable. She was afraid to sleep on the couch outside of the curtain because here was the main wing, the place where the original owner spent her wedding night and committed suicide. Now, her soul came into this body. Then did the soul of the original owner cross time like hers, or did she go to the netherworld? If she didn't go anywhere and was still floating here. Xu Huan's heart trembled a bit and didn't dare to think more about it. She ran to the window, hugged the copper incense burner, blew out the light and climbed onto Gu Shiran's bed. She surrenders and admits defeat. Anyway, they are husband and wife in name. As long as he didn't have other thoughts, she could sleep in the same bed as him. The bed was very large. She placed the copper incense burner in the middle of the bed. Each of them occupied half of the bed. She thought for a bit and was still a bit uneasy. She reached out and pushed Gu Shiran. Gu Shiran was asleep. He whispered confusedly, "What? Don't cross to the other half." Ah. Remembering that her sleeping habit wasn't very good, she was a bit worried and said, "If I accidentally cross to the other side, don't." This was simply making people impossible to sleep. She hadn't finished speaking when Gu Shiran's face came very close to hers. He narrowed his eyes dangerously and spoke like air, "If you say a word more, I will tear your clothes and block your mouth." The voice was too low to be heard but the words were clear. It couldn't be told whether the words were more dangerous or more amorous. They had a subtle temptation when hearing them in the dark. Xu Huan's face was inexplicably warm. When she reacted and wanted to push his face away, he already went back to his pillow and used a voice that was as gentle as coaxing a child to say, "Don't make a fuss anymore. Be well and sleep." Xu Huan speechlessly turned her body and slept while facing the wall. At this point, the light had been turned off for a long time. Her eyes adapted to the darkness. There was also the gleam of the lanterns who came in through the window paper and outlined her body on the wall. She reached out and slowly traced it. She forgot to use the opportunity of bathing to ask for a mirror to see how her current appearance was. She didn't know how she looked like. It didn't have to be too beautiful, but please also not be too ugly. She thought about not important thing to distract from the awkwardness of sharing a bed with a stranger. She originally thought that she would toss about in bed for the whole night, she didn't expect that she would soon fall asleep and she didn't have any dreams. The unfortunate thing was that she was still being awakened by someone the next morning. Xiaoyun stood outside of the room and shouted through the curtain, "Second young master, second young mistress, wake up quickly. Big sister Zissou just passed the message that old madam was coming here. Gu family's boss was coming to check. Shu Huan, who was sleepy, became awake the next moment and sat up. Gu Shiran also opened his eyes. Didn't know whether he was dazed because of sleepiness last night and didn't pay attention, or that he now remembered something. When he looked at the copper incense burner resting in the middle of the bed, his gaze turned weird. Recalling the experience of last night, Shu Huan blushed greatly with shame. She couldn't care about to say something about her foible with self-deprecating humor. She quickly grabbed the incense burner, got out of the bed and put it back to its place. Gu Shiran smiled slightly. Then he said lazily, "Come in." Xianyun and Huiyun came in with things to wash up. She was busy washing her teeth and changing clothes. When Shu Huan was forced to sit in front of the dressing table, her gaze immediately fell on the bronze mirror and she couldn't move anymore. Huiyun was unaware. She was combing her hair and asked, "What kind of hairstyle does second young mistress wants?" "Doesn't matter," Shu Huan answered absent-minded. Her hand reached out and picked up the mirror. She was stunned by what she saw. The face reflected on the bronze mirror was obviously how she looked like when she was 14 or 15 years old. Only, it was less rounded and thinner. The original owner and her. Not only do they have the same name. Even their appearance was the same. She felt that her throat was bit dry and her hand and feet a bit cold. Her thoughts were a bit bizarre. The original owner wouldn't be her past life, right? Chapter 7. You are listening at novelfull.audio. TL note. Happy Valentine to the couples out there. If you don't have your another half yet like me, you can see this as a consolation gift. Chapter 7. Dealing with anger. She didn't know whether it was the past life or not, but she knew that she was about to be out of luck. The sky lightened a bit. The living room in Plum Flower Pavilion was already half filled with people. Sitting on the top was the imposing-looking old madam. The gaze that fell on Shu Huan seemed quite unfriendly. After looking at her for a moment, she commanded, "Kneel." The women who time-traveled had backbone and self-respect. Shu Huan also wanted to be tough and have self-respect for once, but others wouldn't allow it. She only hesitated for a moment when a maid suddenly hit the back of her knee, so she couldn't help but kneel on the ground. Her knees fell heavily on the tiles. It was so painful that her mouth twitched. If she had known it would be like this, she would have been decisive and knelt. At least, she could carefully kneel. This old lady was probably the old madam that the people mentioned many times. It could be seen that she was accustomed to being imposing and wasn't simple and kind as ordinary old ladies. Her general facial appearance possessed a majestic aura. At this time, after Shu Huan knelt, she ignored her, turned and began to scold concubine Yun. "You had always been cautious and sensible. Why did become muddle-headed now? You still hid such a big matter as fire for someone. If it wasn't because I wasn't blind yet and saw that some maids were gossiping early in the morning and asked one about it, I would presumably still be kept in the dark at this moment." Concubine Yun also panicked and knelt on the ground. Yen knows that Yen was wrong. Asking old madam for punishment. Old madam ignored her and began to scold the maids. "I let you lock the person up and keep watch over her, didn't you listen? Or were you taking into account that she is your second young mistress, have a high status and thus couldn't suffer? So, you took this old lady's words as garbage." These words were a bit too much. All of the maids that had their head lowered and were listening outside also knelt on the ground. "Beat them as punishment." The old madam was angry and stood up with the heavy crutch in her hand. "Call 2 servants and drag down all the maids in this yard. Each will receive 20 planks as punishment." The maids were scared by this anger and roared for forgiveness. They cried that there would be no next time. Shu Huan's face also paled instantly. Was this punishment a warning for her? She quickly raised her eyes and looked at Gu Shiran who sat below the old madam. She saw that his lips were in a thin line. Displeasure flashed in his eyes. However, the next moment, he lowered his eyes and didn't seem to have the intention to plead for the people. She could only bite her lips and pleaded, "Old madam, don't be angry. This is my fault." She hadn't finished speaking when she was stopped by old madam, "You little thing that doesn't know the rules. I'm punishing the maids here, do you have the right to butt in?" Shu Huan shut up. Bo Gu family's daughter. In Law Lin Sure had followed old madam to hear. She was at a side and didn't spoke a word. Now that she saw that old madam was furious, she quickly went over to support her. "Old madam, sit down and take it slowly. It's not worth it to get angry and cause damage to your body with these small matters." It seemed that old madam was really angry. She even attacked her daughter. In law. While sitting down, she said with annoyance, "This is a small matter. One should be most cautious with candles. If it was deep in the night, you don't even know what would happen to the person. Fortunately, the fire didn't spread. If not, our Gu residence would have been turned into ashes. The houses in ancient times were made from wood." Old madam wasn't exaggerating the facts. Shu Huan knew that she, old madam, was right. She sighed in her heart. The trouble she caused wasn't small. She didn't know how she would be dealt with. What one was afraid of was exactly what would come. Old madam turned her head and yelled at her, "Do you feel wronged for marrying into Gu family?" It was involuntarily. Naturally, she would feel wronged. However, how would Shu Huan dare to speak the truth? She could only lower her head and reply, "I don't feel wronged." If you don't feel wronged, then why did cause trouble by committing suicide the moment you married? I let people lock you up for 2 days to let you sober up. Who would have thought that you would light fire to burn the room the next moment? Your heart is too vicious. What kind of animosity does our Gu family has with you to let you do such a thing as to exterminate one's whole family? It was obvious that she accidentally knocked over the candle while asleep, but in the eyes of others, it became deliberately committing arson. Ever since Shu Huan was born, she had never been scolded for being vicious. Just as she wanted to refute, the tea bowl in old madam's hand flew over and fell in front of her. The porcelain broke. The tea splashed and drenched her. Under such humiliation, she couldn't feel the pain of the hot tea. She felt that all the blood of her body went straight to her face. If it wasn't because she still had some rationality left, she almost would have stood up and walked away. This was a sight that old madam was venting the anger she had held in for days. No matter how she looked at Shu Huan, she disliked her. She once again stood up from anger and looked at concubine Yun, "Grind the ink. Bring the paper and brush." Concubine Yun quickly stood up. She couldn't care that she stumbled because of kneeling for a long time and rushed to the study to bring the brush, the paper and the ink. Old madam's gaze turned and looked at Gu Shiran, who had been silent for a long time, write the letter of divorce and sent her back to her maiden family. Our Gu family can't tolerate such a vicious person. After this was said, the whole room was quiet. Shu Huan couldn't say whether she felt joy or fear. The joy was because she would be able to regain her freedom, leave Gu household, and the whole world was open to her. The fear was because even if the whole world was open to her, she needed money. She was not able to eat wind and drink dew. Moreover, the original owner still had her family. She didn't know what the situation there was. Gu Shiran smiled slightly and stood up while holding the chair. "Old madam, I fear that this grandson can't do it." Old madam had been accustomed to making decisions without consulting others and knew that the character of this grandson was soft. She didn't expect that he would dare to defy her decision. She was surprised for a moment. Then, she frowned, and her gaze turned sharp. "What, you still want to protect her? This grandson doesn't dare." It was just. Gu Shiran paused and looked with a gaze full of love at Shu Huan. "We already consummated the marriage last night. This grandson couldn't take the risk of divorcing to avoid Gu family's flesh to be stranded outside. When Shu Huan was looked at by that affectionate gaze, she felt goosebumps. And, after she heard those words, she felt that the thunders of the universe suddenly roared. One by one, they hit her. These words didn't shock her alone. Old Madam and Lin Shi were also shocked. It just happened that concubine Yun came back with the brush, paper, and ink. When she heard him personally say that, the bitterness in her heart was hard to describe. She could only lower her head to cover the sadness on her face. When they recovered from the shock, it was Lin Shi who ordered the maids, "You all retreat." Until when the people were gone did she smile at Old Madam, "This is good news. I have to congratulate Old Madam first. Perhaps, you would be able to hold a great-grandchild next year." While talking, her gaze swept once over Gu Shiran. Worry appeared on her face. "It's just, Shiran, you haven't recovered yet. This was forcing yourself too much. Don't you know how to cherish your own body?" Originally, Old Madam's face turned more gently, but after hearing the last sentence, her face changed again. She looked suspiciously at Shu Huan's tummy. Then, she looked at Gu Shiran and humphed coldly, "Ran has grown up. To protect your wife, you even learned how to lie to deceive your elders." Couldn't blame her for being suspicious. This grandson fainted once on the wedding night. He almost couldn't be saved. Now, when she looked at his body, it still looked weak. If no one supported him, he couldn't even walk alone. How could he had consummated the marriage? Gu Shiran lowered his eyes and said, "This grandson doesn't dare to lie." Old Madam was still skeptical and was silent. It was Lin Shi who said, "Where is the handkerchief of consummation? This practice is to be seen by people. You two shouldn't hide it because of embarrassment." One sentence, Shu Huan's heart beat faster. She knew what this handkerchief of consummation was. It was just, that she couldn't recall what it was at the moment. Being asked suddenly, she didn't know what to answer. She could only continue to pretend to be deaf and pushed all the trouble to Gu Shiran. Anyway, it was he who pulled a lie. He should naturally also make the lie whole. Old Madam frowned and looked at Gu Shiran, waiting for his answer.